Hey everybody, Josh Peck here. I got an interesting video for you today about the Israel and UFO prophetic connection. And this is in preparation for a presentation that I'll be giving in Orlando at the end of this month for the Prophecy Watcher Conference. So what I like to do is when I have a rough draft of a presentation, I like to put it online and get your feedback because that helps me refine it and make it as good as it can be. So I'm going to run through that. For those not familiar, my name is Josh Peck and I work with Prophecy Watchers full time. I've written several books and directed 3 documentary films. My websites are dailyrenegade.com and prophecywatchers.com. Email is joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com. And if you're interested in this topic, I'll announce it here. Check out my new book, The Final Cataclysm, Supernatural Signs of the End Times. This is actually a 2-book set. I just submitted it, so it's not ready for purchase just yet at the time of this recording, but it will be very soon, like within a couple of days probably. It's a 2-book, 2-volume set. The Final Cataclysm, Supernatural Signs of the End Times. I'm very excited about that. So this information that we're going to be talking about comes from those books. So before we get into the actual connection between Israel and UFOs, we need some context behind beliefs about UFOs within Christianity. So we can talk about UFOs and the church. So a recent report was released showing that during World War II, in light of a UFO report coming from a member of the military, Winston Churchill actually called for this to be suppressed and kept secret for fear that a global panic would ensue and that people would lose their faith in the church. But is this what really would happen? Can the broad possibility of extraterrestrial life in the cosmos and faith in the Word of God coexist? Well, anyone who's done a substantial study of official disclosure has come across the religious aspect. So how would religious institutions react to either an official disclosure event or a genuine extraterrestrial presence as a whole? Well, in fact, it has been hypothesized that this is a major reason our government seems to be hiding information from us. Fear of widespread panic and hysteria, especially among religious groups. There have been several attempts to gauge what the reaction would be among religious Americans. The earliest formal effort was in the Alexander UFO Religious Crisis Survey, or AWFORCS, in 1994. So the purpose of this survey was to find an answer to a seemingly simple yet extremely important question. Would disclosure of U.S. government contact with aliens really precipitate a religious crisis that would threaten the continuity of government and even our civilization? Well, to seek an answer, a mail survey of Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish clergy was conducted in order to discover their informed opinions. Now, as popular as this survey became in the UFO community, the math and percentages speak to its legitimacy. So, or lack thereof, I should say. So by the survey's own calculations and sources, at most, only 0.27% of the U.S. population was accounted for in the survey. This only accounts for 1 in 374 people in the United States at the time. So this is roughly the equivalent of taking 2 random students out of an average American high school and expecting only their views to represent the views of the rest of the students in that entire school. That's probably not going to happen. So, simply speaking, the survey does not cover what is needed to fairly assess how religious people would react to a genuine extraterrestrial reality. And this is especially shown when it was found that only 34% of religious people thought the reality of ET would cause a crisis in religion, whereas 69% of non-religious people believed a crisis would occur with religious people. If anything, The only thing that this study shows is that non-religious people do not understand religious people as much as they think they do. And of course, we see that in our day-to-day lives all the time. But as it turns out, in the case of extraterrestrials, this has been the case for quite some time. So let's discuss the history of religious and theological beliefs concerning extraterrestrials. So before getting into this section, I want to make it extremely clear that there is a difference between asking if non-human life could possibly exist in the cosmos and asking what are the UFOs that we see in our skies. I believe these are two different questions. I believe the UFOs and alien abductions that we hear about are completely demonic and have a supernatural or spiritual origin and explanation. I'm also not threatened by the idea that there could be a planet millions of light years away that contains life. I just don't think we would ever be able to interact with it. Now, one might wonder how we got here. How did evangelical Christianity and theological conservatism get to the point at which it is generally opposed to the idea of life on other worlds? Well, surprisingly, it has not always been this way. In fact, not too long ago, a belief in the possibility of extraterrestrial life was commonly accepted among Christians and other religious circles. So, what changed? Well, Thomas Paine in 1793 argued that astronomical science made it impossible for any thinking person to accept the general Christian notions of a divine incarnation and redeemer in his book, Age of Reason. Now, through his history of confronting Christianity's beliefs in extraterrestrial life at the time, Paine became a deist. In his own words, quote, "From whence could arise the strange conceit that the Almighty should come to die in our world because, they say, one man and one woman had eaten an apple, and on the other hand, are we to suppose that every world in the boundless creation had an Eve, an apple, a serpent, and a redeemer? The Son of God would have nothing else to do than to travel from world to world in an endless succession of death with scarcely a momentary interval of life." Now, while this old argument really holds no real weight and actually proves a profound misunderstanding of the Christian faith, it was convincing to some during its time, and today, unfortunately, it's still one of the main arguments Christians have adopted to argue against the possibility of extraterrestrials. Again, this is an argument that originated from somebody who was totally hostile to Christianity. Yet, the belief in the possibility of extraterrestrial life continued through the late 19th and 20th centuries in the church. But it soon turned into the threat that many Christians see it as today. With the advent of Darwinism, scientists began to be viewed as antagonistic by Christians who accepted the Bible's claim of a divine creator. The church became increasingly hostile to the idea of intelligent life on other planets once Darwinists concluded that the discovery of extraterrestrial life would add support for naturalistic evolution against the idea of a creator. Again, while this claim is totally untrue and the discovery of life on other planets would not refute the Bible or support Darwinian evolution, this is what led to where we are today. So let's talk about the incarnation and redemption question. The two major reasons that Christians today do not accept the possibility of extraterrestrial life are the supposed problems of evolution and the incarnation. Now, the evolution claim is actually really simple to refute. Basically, if evidence of life on Earth isn't enough to cause a crisis of faith in Christians and send them running into the arms of Darwin, then neither would proof of life on another planet. Christians would just say, well, I guess God created life there too, and that'd be the end of it. So let's talk, that one's easy. Let's talk about the main one. Let's talk about the supposed threat to the incarnation and redemption. The argument usually sounds roughly the same, regardless of who it's coming from. So basically it asks, if there is life on other planets, wouldn't Jesus have to be born on all those planets as an alien in order to offer the aliens redemption like he did with humans? So the whole argument really revolves around redemption. If there is no need for redemption, there's no need for an incarnation. However, if redemption is needed, the Bible does not describe a process by which it is granted to non-human entities. For example, angels who have sinned against God are not granted forgiveness or redemption of any kind. On the other end of the spectrum, there is nothing to suggest that animals are in need of redemption or forgiveness. So, what evidence is there that extraterrestrials would be in need of similar forgiveness and redemption as human beings? Well, this usually comes up because Romans 8 and Revelation 21 through 22 tells us that the atonement of Christ ultimately extends throughout the entire universe. Scripture teaches that everything will be recreated to be like Eden before the fall of man. So it would stand to reason that extraterrestrial life, whether intelligent or not, if it exists, would be included in this, similar to animals. Yet the Bible makes no mention one way or another. Now, again, I want to make mention here that I'm only looking at the extraterrestrial question generally as a whole. And I mention this again because admittedly this topic was challenging for me when I first approached it as well. So I'm not talking about modern day UFO reports or abduction scenarios. I would agree. Those are demonic. We're just looking at the broad question, could alien life exist out in the cosmos without directly contradicting the Bible? Now, while it's true the New Testament teaches that all creation will be redeemed, it's an assumption to say that all of the universe needs to be redeemed from moral guilt, wrongdoing, or sin outside of humanity. The Bible doesn't say that our intelligence or spirituality is why we are morally guilty before God and in need of redemption. It's not because we're intelligent, sentient, self-aware, conscious beings. We are in a state of needed redemption because God applies Adam's guilt to all humans. Salvation, in a biblical sense, cannot be earned and it's never deserved. It's a gift to us by God through Jesus if we choose to accept it. Therefore, if God did not apply moral guilt to extraterrestrials, and there's no indication he did if they exist, then the redemption objection is rendered illogical. Extraterrestrial life is likely of no concern when it comes to God's redemptive plan. Similar to animals not needing a savior, there's no indication that extraterrestrials would either. The point of the redemption of all creation, humans excluded, is not to undo a sinful nature or a moral guilt issue. Remember, animals themselves can be violent to the point of ripping each other apart, but we do not ascribe moral guilt to them, yet we know this is a part of the curse, and there will come a time when Jesus restores everything and animals will not be violent anymore. Same with natural disasters. We do not ascribe moral guilt to the earth for that. The earth and animals are not guilty in a moral sense. So the point is to make creation what it once was in Eden and set it in a right relationship with God. Human beings, however, are different. Again, I must stress, if there was a situation where intelligent beings came to Earth calling themselves extraterrestrials, then started teaching humanity anything that conflicts with the Bible, I would consider those not as actual ETs, but as demonic imposters. So this brings us to the topic of the image of God. When the term image of God is properly defined, it shows from the understanding that intelligent alien life would not have been created in the image of God, that Christianity actually could sustain an extraterrestrial reality quite easily. Humanity would still maintain the uniqueness of being created in the image of God because extraterrestrial life, if it exists, would be excluded from it. And the Bible gives us a clear description of the image of God in Genesis. So Genesis 1:26 through 28 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" Again, that's Genesis 1:26 through 28. Now, it's quite common and has been for centuries to define the image of God as having as something to do with intelligence, the ability to communicate, the possession of a spirit and or soul, the presence of a conscience, the ability to exercise free will, and the capacity for abstract thought or some combination of those attributes. Through biblical clarification, the image of God is none of these. And the reason for this is that the image is what makes mankind distinguishably unique in relation to any other created thing in the universe. So in his book, The Unseen Realm, Dr. Michael S. Heiser explains the image of God from a theological and biblical perspective. From the book of Genesis and using the term divine image bearing, Dr. Heiser lists descriptions of the image of God. So this is from Dr. Michael Heiser from The Unseen Realm. He wrote, quote, "Both men and women are included. Divine image bearing is what makes humankind distinct from the rest of earthly creation, i.e. plants and animals. The text of Genesis 1:26 does not inform us that divine image bearing makes us distinct from heavenly beings, those sons of God who were already in existence at the time of creation. The plurals in Genesis 1:26 mean that in some way we share something with them when it comes to bearing God's image. There is something about the image that makes humankind like God in some way. There is nothing in the text to suggest that the image has been or can be bestowed incrementally or partially. You're either created as God's image bearer or you are not. One cannot speak of being partly or potentially bearing God's image. This tells us that the image of God must be something possessed in its entirety by every human being, regardless of physical or mental development." And this is why it can't be, just the ability to think or self-awareness or anything, because, think about babies in the womb. As far as we know, they're not really self-aware in the way that we are, but we would consider them made in the image of God, and we would consider them human beings. So the image of God, it's not something that's bestowed incrementally. It's something you either have or you don't. And if you're a human, then you're made in that. So if we think of humankind as image bearers rather than the image being an attribute of humankind, then these things make a lot more sense. Humans are representations of God on earth. We are to represent him on earth and take care of it in the way that he would if he were here. This is why murder is such a grave offense. When someone kills another human being, he's essentially killing God in effigy. The image is what humans are, not what humans have. This is why extraterrestrials, if they exist, would not be considered as being created in the image of God. They aren't human. They weren't put in charge of the earth the way humans are. God only tasked humans with being his representatives on earth. Therefore, extraterrestrials would not be made in the image of God. So purely by status, not considering intelligence or ability, and as far as we can discern from the biblical descriptions of humanity's uniqueness, extraterrestrials would likely be grouped closer to animals in the sense of not playing a central or even a major role in God's plan for redemption. So, taking all this into account, there is no real problem with the idea of extraterrestrial life from biblical descriptions of creation, humanity, and God's redemptive plan. The supposed problem brought up from people like Thomas Paine are merely contrived and hold no real weight against Scripture. So at its heart, using the Bible to either support or deny the existence of extraterrestrial life is an argument made purely from silence. It is a good idea to begin thinking about these things now. We do not know when, if ever, an official disclosure event will happen. If it does happen, we do not know what form it will take. We don't know if it will be an event as fantastic as a UFO landing on the White House lawn, or something more mundane, such as leaked documents or the U.S. government finally admitting that they know something, which we are in the very slow process of it now and have been since 2017. It's crazy that that's already been 8 years ago, but For Christians, whether we agree on the extraterrestrial question is not nearly as important as what we have in common. So we all accept Jesus Christ as our Savior. We all have a promise of redemption. And when this physical life is finished, we will all spend eternity together. At that time and on that side of eternity, I'm willing to bet that all of the issues that we're so opinionated about and hold so dear now will seem utterly small, weak, and pathetic to the point that we'll wonder what in the world we were thinking by allowing those matters to divide us. So let's not wait till eternity to realize this. Now, while we keep that plus everything that we learned in mind, let me show you one big piece of evidence showing that UFOs and abductions being reported are not extraterrestrial in nature, but are rather supernatural and malevolent. So now we are at the place where we can talk about some UFO and Israel coincidences. So a few years ago, I came across a strange connection and made a loose prediction on what we could expect in the near future. Back in 2017, a couple of months before, two striking yet seemingly unconnected events happened within the span of 6 days. The release of the New York Times article that exposed the Tic Tac UFO and others to the world, and President Trump declaring that Jerusalem is Israel's capital and promising to move the embassy there. Oops. Well, give me 1 second here. I need to make a quick correction. I had written about a strange connection between UFOs and Israel. So I want to make that available to you here. And keep in mind, I wrote this and it was published right before these two things happened, like a couple of months before. And I'm bringing this up because now we see major events in Israel, and for reasons I'll lay out here, I believe we're going to see some more major news in terms of UFOs. In fact, it probably is no coincidence that there was a major UFO, or now UAP, congressional hearing, and then shortly after, there were attacks in Israel. The main point is to show that these are not merely extraterrestrials, but something more supernatural. This is why there is a connection between major UFO sightings and significant events in Israel. So to explain what I mean, here are some points from the book I wrote with Derek Gilbert, The Day the Earth Stands Still. But again, because that book is out of print, and I don't know why, but it is, all of this information is available in the final catalyst, which at the time of this recording should be available in just a couple of days, hopefully by the weekend. So there seems to be something strange looming between the years 2017, 2018, and possibly in the years following. One piece of this puzzle came while I was reading the extraordinary book, What Dwells Beyond, the Bible Believer's Handbook to Understanding Life in the Universe, by the amazingly talented biblical researcher, Jeffrey W. Martis. He's also the one that does all of my book covers. So those amazing book covers, that is his handiwork. In Chapter 2, Martis makes an interesting connection. He shows how certain significant events in Israel's history seem to correspond to events reigniting the idea of alien life elsewhere in the universe. So, for example, in 600 BC, approximately, Nebuchadnezzar burned Jerusalem to the ground. And at that same time, a curious belief called cosmic pluralism began. Cosmic pluralism is a term used to describe the existence of more than one planet, usually hundreds or millions of planets, populated with intelligent life. In AD 70, Rome burned Jerusalem to the ground, and in the same year, the famous philosopher Plutarch wrote in his De Face in Orbe Lunae, or On the Face in the Moon, quote, "The men on the moon, if they do exist, are slight of body and capable of being nourished," end quote. Now, what makes this quote so important is that Plutarch was the last major philosopher to seriously comment on cosmic pluralism before it was revived in the Middle Ages. There was a third major connection between cosmic plurality and significant events in Israel. Modern ufology and the rise of aliens in the public mind began in 1947 with the UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico. 1 year later, in 1948, Israel became a nation again. When we entered the beginning of 2017, we were reminded of a major event in Israel's history. So 100 years prior, in 1917, the Balfour Declaration was written. The Balfour Declaration was a letter dated November 2nd, 1917, from Arthur James Balfour, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, to Walter Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland. So, strangely enough, less than a month earlier, October 13th, during this same year, was the famous Fatima sighting. And at the time, it was publicized as an appearance of Mary, the mother of Jesus, but when reading through the eyewitness accounts of what would be called the miracle of the sun, it became apparent that this was a sighting of a UFO. If you want some excellent research into that, check out the work of L.A. Marzulli. He's got a couple of DVDs on it. He might have written about it, but he's got a lot. He's talked about it in videos and stuff. So check out the work of L.A. Marzulli on Fatima, and your mind's going to be blown. But also in 1917, during World War I, there were numerous reports of UFOs from soldiers on all battlefronts. In fact, it was even reported that the German pilot Manfred Freyer, better known as the Red Baron, believed that he shot down a UFO over Belgium in the spring of 1917. The Balfour Declaration was actually not the first step in efforts towards establishing a home for the Jewish people. In 1897, so that would have been 120 years ago from 2017, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland by Theodor Herzl, the founder of the modern Zionist movement, and the Basel Declaration was submitted. It was stated, quote, Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law, end quote. So, the new program, which came to be known as the Basel Program, was adopted under the following terms, and all of this is quoted. It says, Zionism aims at establishing for the Jewish people a publicly and legally assured home in Palestine. For the attainment of this purpose, the Congress considers the following means serviceable. 1. The promotion of the settlement of Jewish agriculturalists, artisans, and tradesmen in Palestine. 2. The federation of all Jews into local or general groups according to the laws of the various countries. 3. The strengthening of the Jewish feeling and consciousness. 4. Preparatory steps for the attainment of those government grants which are necessary to the achievement of the Zionist purpose. During this same year, possibly the most famous UFO incident besides Roswell occurred. The Aurora UFO incident reportedly happened on April 17th, 1897. So locals claimed a UFO crashed on a farm near Aurora, Texas, and is claimed to have resulted in the death of the alien craft's pilot. The alien's body is allegedly buried in an unmarked grave at the local cemetery. A bit more recently, in 1977, Menachem Begin became the Prime Minister of Israel, and in 1978, he signed the Camp Davis Peace Accords with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. This was facilitated by President Jimmy Carter. It was a major turning point in Israel's history. Now, oddly, 1977 and 78 were also important years in modern ufology. The government of Brazil has released declassified security files pertaining to Operation Saucer, a top-secret investigation by the Força Aérea Brasileira, probably mispronouncing that, into the 1977 UFO flap in the northern state of Pará. Beginning in October of 1977 and lasting through the first half of 78, the city Calheiros of the Brazilian state of Pará underwent extreme UFO and alien activity, even to the point of being called a UFO invasion by the newspaper O Liberal. And this is now known as the Calheiros UFO flap. So to recap, the first attempt to make Israel a home for the Jewish people occurred 120 years ago from 2017, which is the same year, or the same time as the Aurora UFO incident. 100 years ago from 2017, the Balfour Declaration was submitted, which was the same year as the Fatima sighting and also when the Red Baron believed he shot down a UFO. 70 years ago from 2017, in 1947, the UFO crash of Roswell happened. And then around that same time, in 1948, Israel became a nation again. Now, adding to all of this, 50 years ago from 2017 was the Six-Day War, or Third Arab-Israeli War, of 1967, in which Israel defended against the invading armies of surrounding nations. But strangely enough, at that same time, the most intensive and long-lasting UFO sighting wave of all time occurred. And you can actually find that on NICAP's website. The title is The 1967 UFO Chronology, the Mother of All Sighting Waves, NICAP's massive 85-page chronology of UFO incidents and events for 1967. And that is at nicap.org/chronos/1967fullrep.htm. So taking all this into account, the years 2017 to 2018 seem to have a lot of significant anniversaries of Israel/UFO history converging. All of the numbers that we looked at in regards to these anniversary dates, 120, 100, 70, and 50, are all candidates for what constitutes a generation in the Bible. And it seems all of these generation cycles converged at the end of 2017 when most people agree official disclosure actually began. Now, as Christians studying prophecy, we might look back to the end of 2017 as the official beginning of the Great Deception, or what the Bible calls the strong delusion, if that does, in fact, refer to the alien deception. Now, that doesn't mean it's fully here yet. That probably will occur after the rapture, but it could at least be the beginning of the process. Now, here's an excerpt from what I wrote and published, and keep in mind, this was released a couple of months before anything was announced with Tic Tac UAPs or any major changes in Israel. So I wrote this, quote, and again, this was a couple of months before any of this happened. There was nothing about this in the news. I wrote, quote, all these facts and more seem to be pointing to the years 2017 to 2018 as a significant time in our near future. It would seem, if history repeats itself, that we might see a major event in Israel, while at the same time we will see a major event promoting the idea of cosmic plurality. What this might be, one can only speculate. Could it be a war igniting in the Middle East involving Israel? Could an official disclosure event of UFO knowledge from the government occur? Might there be another major UFO sighting or something even bigger? Perhaps it is something that will begin in 2017/2018 and culminate later. And that's exactly what we see. That's exactly what we are living in now. Now, I've talked a little bit about how these things are spiritual or extra-dimensional. I want to talk a little bit about extra-dimensional UFOs, because this is another thing that we can actually use to show that these things are not physical, but that there's something spiritual. So how can something appear to be made of solid material, yet behave as if it is more of a liquid or sometimes even a gas? It's a phenomenon that has been reported, documented, and discussed for some time now in regards to the strange, seemingly impossible feats that certain UFOs are able to achieve. Now, of course, the amount of videos found on websites like YouTube is vast, and sorting through all of them can be a strenuous feat in itself. While I maintain that with enough time and effort, any one of these videos could be faked, I still believe that there's a level of truth to this phenomenon. It's difficult to ignore the many reports and documented cases of UFOs that appear solid, yet seem to be able to morph. So what are we dealing here? Well, what are we dealing with here? This is one of the many questions that I seek to answer in an earlier book that I wrote called Quantum Creation, which is available at prophecywatchers.com if you're interested in that. So what we'll be getting into requires a basic understanding of what's called the fourth spatial dimension. And one of the best ways that I've heard this explained is by use of lower dimensional examples. So I'd like to refer to the work of fiction called Flatland by E.A. Abbott, written in 1884. So in Flatland, if you guys are familiar with the work of Chuck Missler, then you might be familiar with Flatland because he used that example quite a bit, and it's the best one. So, but in Flatland, the main character named A Square tells us of his experience as a two-dimensional square who later encounters the third spatial dimension. He begins his story by first explaining what his reality would look like from our three-dimensional perspective. So, to quote A Square in Flatland, quote, "Nothing was visible nor could be visible to us except straight lines, and the necessity of this I will speedily demonstrate. Place a penny on the middle of one of your tables in space, and leaning over it, look down upon it. It will appear a circle. But now, drawing back to the edge of the table, gradually lower your eye, thus bringing yourself more and more into the condition of what inhabitants of Flatland, and you will find the penny becoming more and more oval to your view, and at last, when you have placed your eye exactly on the edge of the table, so that you are, as it were, actually a Flatland citizen, the penny will then have ceased to appear oval at all, and will have become, so far as you can see, a straight line." End quote. So since Flatland would only consist of the X and the Y axes, there would be no up or down. There would only be side to side and front to back, no up or down. So because of this, the perspective of Flatlanders would be considerably different from our own. Any shape they would be looking at would appear to them as a line. So imagine if you were able to breach Flatland as a three-dimensional being. Let's say you were able to stick your finger through their two-dimensional space. What would that look like to a Flatlander? Well, they would see a very small line segment appear out of nowhere because there's no up or down. They can't see your finger approaching. They can only see when it breaches their two-dimensional space. So as your finger passes through the two-dimensional plane, they would see the line segment kind of grow in size. From the tip of your fingertip, it would be really small, but then as your finger continued in Flatland, the line would continue in size. And when you take your finger out again, they would see the line segment shrink in size, then disappear again, seeming to vanish in thin air. Now, if you really wanted to give the Flatlanders something to talk about, you could stick your whole hand through their two-dimensional space. They would first see a small line segment appear as the tip of your middle finger breaches the two-dimensional plane. Next, your index and ring fingers would break through. The Flatlanders would see two more segments appear at either side. The first one grows in size. Then, as your pinky and thumb break through, they would see two more segments appear. As the rest of your hand goes through, they would see all five segments, because to them, they would look disconnected. They wouldn't look connected yet. But as the rest of your hand goes through, they would see all five segments combined into one large segment as it gets to your hand. Then, as your wrist went through, they would see the large segment shrink in size. When you pull your hand out, they would see the entire spectacle again, only this time in reverse, until all of the segments disappear completely. So we can use the example of Flatland to help understand what a four-dimensional interaction would look like in our three-dimensional world. If a four-dimensional sphere, often referred to as a hypersphere, were to move through our three spatial dimensions, we would only be able to perceive it through our three-dimensional eyes. We would see a very tiny sphere suddenly appear as it breaches our dimension. The sphere would grow in size as it moves through our dimension, and then it would shrink in size as it moves out, and then disappear completely as it exits. Now, this brings us back to the extra-dimensional nature of UFOs. Let's say, for sake of argument, that we want to convince a person that these morphing UFOs, because what I just described is exactly what's been reported, that they are actually spiritual in nature and not merely physical. We might first pose the question, what is the spirit world? Well, as I postulate in Quantum Creation, and again, all of this information is in the Final Catalyst 2-book set, I believe the spirit world described in the Bible, or at least part of it, that coincides and sometimes even bleeds into our own, is actually the fourth spatial dimension. It's a higher dimension of space talked about in modern quantum physics. So if we wanted to convince a person or at least give evidence that these morphing UFOs are spiritual or extra dimensional in nature, then we can use scientific language with a little bit of common sense to get that message across. So, excuse me, I got it. And I got a duplicate slide here I got to get rid of. Nope. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So let's continue. So that's another thing that we can use to show that these things aren't just physical, that they have all of the attributes and they behave in a way that we would expect objects from higher spatial dimensions to behave if they exist, and seems like they do. So given all of that, and given that what I had written turned out to be accurate, as, again, many people say it was the end of 2017, a month or two after my book was published, that official disclosure began. And that was actually 6 days apart from Trump announcing the U.S. Embassy would be moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that was a big deal because it was Trump admitting that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. And as far as I know, he was the first president to do that. I believe it is likely that we'll be seeing more UFO news, and it will further push the agenda that these are alien beings rather than anything dubious. Now, again, we need to keep in mind that this is strong evidence. These things are not extraterrestrial. Why would ETs care about what happens in a tiny random country in the world? So much so that they would purposely coincide all of their plans around events in that country. However, if these things are supernatural and the Bible is true, then it makes a lot more sense. Our spiritual enemy has always had an interest in Israel because it is the home of God's chosen people. This is strong evidence that we can use to convince those who have bought into the ET lie that there is a better explanation found in the Bible that leads directly to the saving grace of Jesus Christ. So, given this, we need to remain informed because the timing is getting short. Keep in your word, understand the times that you're living in, and let's be the watchmen that we are supposed to be. And this is how we can warn the world together and point them to the light of truth. Thank you so much. Okay, that is the end of it. So with that was about 41 minutes. So that's a good amount of time. I'm supposed to fill 45. So that's pretty decent. But I'd like to know what you think. Again, this is just a rough draft. What do you think of this presentation as it is? Do you have any questions about it? Is there anything you would add or remove or anything like that? Let me know in the comments. That's greatly appreciated. I do read those. It does help, and I very much appreciate it. Please share this with everybody that you know. Please subscribe, click the bell to turn on all notifications, and until next time, thank you so much. Take care and God bless. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. You'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.